Okay, everybody. Today, right now, we have the one, the only, Joe Bongiovanni. Joe identifies himself as a second-generation monetary reformer. So you could say that he's got monetary reform in his blood, in his DNA. And he has been studying money systems for over 40 years. He is the co-founder and co-director with Peter Young of the Kettle Pond Institute for Debt-Free Money. Joe is an important and precise monetary blogger, but has been blocked from websites such as Naked Capitalism and some NMT sites because they can't answer the excellent points he makes and want to ignore them. Joe is a strong supporter of the Senators' Need Act and will tell us why our monetary system is broken and needs us to voice and exercise our rights as monetary reformers. The subject of Joe's talk is the world's bankers and how they need our help. Well, it's something else up there. The world's central bankers need our help. They know something's broken and we know how to fix it. So please welcome Joe Bongiovanni.
Thanks, Jamie. I appreciate that very much. And thank you, Stephen, for inviting me back and having an opportunity to come back to Chicago and to talk to and with mostly the people who come here to do what Robert Hemphill, the guy who made the famous quote about the staggering thought that we have no credit, if we have no debt, we have no money, all of that, and what we need to do about it. And he said it's the most important subject that intelligent people can ponder and reflect upon, and that's kind of what we do whenever we get together over here. So it's my pleasure to be here to ponder with you all. This one? That's dope. Thanks. Thanks, John. How about that? How about that? Okay. One more? Okay. How's that? Is that better? Do you want me to hold it? I will.
I think so.
Think so? Yeah. What did you do?
I yelled.
You yelled? Okay. Well, I'm going to yell too then. The thing is, the Kettle Pond Institute. What is it really? And it's the tiniest of think tanks that there are out there. We get together at a place called Kettle Pond up in Vermont once every year. We have our annual meeting of the members of the Kettle Pond Institute. And we basically decide whether we're just going to continue to do what we're doing, and we try to do whatever we're doing as well as we can. And I get a lot of feedback, quite frankly, from the people that are there at the gathering. And I try to use whatever input they give me to change the message or think about things that people who are not doing this 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, think about when it comes to money. Like Jamie said, I really learned about monetary reform, not maybe like most people in this room from Stephen Zarlanga, but from my dad, who had the same name as me, and who stumbled upon the subject of monetary reform, by being a good Christian capitalist businessman. And but once he found it, when he latched onto it, it became like the work for the rest of his life, which was about the second half of his life. And he taught me many, 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 many things. And I'm totally indebted to him, for being able to be here today and do the work that I do. One of the things, among the many things that my dad told me, I'm going to say two of them. One was, because we've talked a little bit about this, about how we're going to make this monetary revolution. And my dad, threw me a quote that he said was from Marx. I've never actually seen it. He said, Marx said, revolution is 90% opportunity. Now, whether Mark said that or not, or my dad said it, I don't care. I think it's right. I think it's true. And so this is where we are. And this is kind of like maybe a big part of the point about the central bankers need our help, because the banking system and money system is broken. And they will tell you, by the way, they have a certain creed among the central bankers of the world. It was mentioned already here. There is no alternative. There's no alternative. This is the system that we've got. There's no alternative. And that has been, kind of parlayed into a reality through a lot of the international treaties and agreements that we enter into with various countries under various schemes, where they basically say, okay, you can deal with us, you can be in this treaty, you can play with us and do business with us, if the bankers create your money by debt, by all these mechanisms that we talk about. So in other words, it is the only game in town, but that doesn't mean that there is no alternative out there. There is an alternative, and there's a better alternative, and that's what we're doing, is trying to get that message over to them. Sorry. So having said that, when my dad was really trying to explain to me about the fact that the banks create the money and we can't do anything as long as they create the money, so we have to try to get the money power back. But he also said to me, don't villainize the bankers, okay? He said, the bankers grew up learning something and implementing something and doing something that they think is the right thing to do. They get up every day, they kiss their wife goodbye, they go to the bank, they make loans, and they do the best job that they can at what they're doing. And he said to me, the first part of this was very unbelievable at the time, since I figured, well, if my dad knew it, and now I knew it. He said 90% of the bankers don't know about the money power. And my dad used that term, the money power, just like Van Buren, was it? Martin Van Buren. My dad always used that term, the money power. That's what we're talking about, is the money power. And he said, the bankers don't really know about the money power. They actually think that they just go in there and they actually lend out money. That's what they think, And I was like, really? So he said 90% of the bankers don't understand the money power. 95% of the economists don't understand the money power. And 99% of the people in the Congress don't understand the money power. So, if we take those numbers out, first of all, with the bankers. Well, when Pete and I started the Kettle Pond Institute, we had a little stumbling block right at the beginning, which I didn't know anything about, quite frankly, until September 15th, 2008, when we were all gathered at Kettle Pond, and there was after I'd been going to this gathering for about 15 years and telling everybody the money system is screwed, and when it goes down, it's going to be taking us all down with it. Well, finally, on September 15th, 2008, they all said, so Joe, tell us that again, because that might be important. And that's how we got started. But that day, when Pete and I decided, that we were going to be the ones on behalf of the group, the Kettle Pond group, to do something, when we were out in the canoe on the pond and we were paddling around, Pete was fishing, and he turned around and he said to me, Joe, my dad's a banker. And I said, oh, that's interesting, Pete. He said, yeah, he's the president of a bank, and I got to deal with this with him, And I said, wow, well, that's great. I said, because, to me, like I said, bankers just trying to do. So he said, well, I'm going to ask him if what you're saying is true and real. And so he did, Dad, I got this guy, he says banks create money when they make loans. And is that true? This is what Pete got back to me. Yeah, he said, no. He said, you're hanging around with communists, Pete. He said, I gave you a good upbringing. I sent you to the finest schools, and you end up hanging around with a bunch of communists. He said, so that ain't true. And if you're going to believe him instead of me, well, I don't know. Maybe he said, I'll cut you out of my will. I don't know. But anyway, Pete got back to me and he said, Joe, my dad said it ain't true. And I said, well, Pete, I really don't know what to tell you. I had sent Pete all the stuff from the Federal Reserve, etc. Pete. Then I reminded Pete that he told me that his cousin, Patrick, worked at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And he was a lawyer who was involved in developing, some of these, international, agreements between the Fed and actually other central banks, other sovereign central banks. And I said, well, why don't you ask Patrick? So he did. Dad, we're going to ask Patrick. Okay, ask Patrick. He was real excited. Patrick, do the banks create money when they make loans? Yeah, and I don't know if that's what killed Pete's dad or not, but he died a short while after that. but anyway, and with all respect to Pete and his family and his dad. But the point being that there was the essential proof that what my dad told me, that 90% of the bankers don't know the money power, is a real fact, and so that's something that we have to live with, and so. When I'm going to talk about central banking, we're getting higher up the echelon of knowledge and understanding, and it's a little different there. It's a little different there. But still, among the bankers that we would be dealing with, they don't really know it. But he also said 99% of the Congress don't understand money. Now, you should know that these were in the years when my dad was working very, very hard on this. My dad used to go to Washington every chance he got, used to meet with, the people in Washington who were the heads of the banking and committees, and et cetera. And still he came back home with this opinion, 99% of the people in Congress don't understand the money. And I used to say, I can't believe that. They're the ones who the Constitution gave the power to create the money. How could it possibly be that you get involved, you get elected to Congress, and you go in Congress? Orientation, I got elected to the National Board of the Rural Electric Co-op Association. The first thing I did, they brought me in there, so we're going to orient you now about what it is that we do and how we do stuff, and here's our bylaws, and here's et cetera, orientation. I guess they have no orientation for Congress, because to me, if they do have an orientation for Congress, they should start with that Constitution. These are the powers of the Congress, and one of them is to create money. But I guess they don't, because here we are today, There's 535 members of Congress. My dad's right. If he's even close to being right, 1% is 5.35. I ask anybody in this room, do you think there are 5.35 members of Congress that understand the money system, the money power? Not at all. If there's one, we're lucky. We had one. If there's one, if there's two, wow. So the things that my dad told me, I guess I don't disagree with him. But he also said about the fact that he said, I'm not going to be able to fix the money system. Maybe you can, he said, but I can't, because that line of trajectory of debt, that we were looking at from Bob yesterday or this morning, was it? My dad said, Joey, in your lifetime, that line's going to go to bust, okay? And I think they've actually carried it out a little long, because I know my dad thought I was going to live this long, but I do think he's right, okay? And I do think now is the time that he's right. Because why? Because we've reached the point where none of the fixes that central banks have in their toolbox, if you will, that's the terminology they like to use, can do anything about the situation that we're in. And so the other thing that my dad told me was this statement. He said, when the bankers do understand the money power, the bankers that do understand the money power, secrecy is their currency, okay? So in other words, they don't talk about it, okay? Now, not to say that they don't do research and they don't publish papers, they do, and I do encourage people, by the way, to read their papers. But secrecy with regard to I said it, but the jig is up on debt-based money. The jig is up on debt-based money. So what are the things, I always try to say, what are the things that happened in the last year? Well, one of the things that happened in the last year, as far as I'm concerned, a salient point, was an interview that happened between the Cobden Center, and if you don't know about the Cobden Center, it's a libertarian type of a think tank in the UK, London-based, They're a little, but even for libertarians, these guys are actually outside the box thinkers. I will tell you that Ben Dyson and those guys work with these guys because of the fact that they're trying to end fractional reserve banking, et cetera, et cetera. So these guys are a little bit, a little bit outside of the ordinary libertarian, perspective on things. And so they published on their website, and I subscribe to their website. I comment on their website all the time because they let me, one of the reasons. And I think that we have, intelligent discussions about money and government and all of that stuff. So in, I think it was April or May of this year, well, to me, it was one of the more salient points was when they did an interview with Dr. William White, who at the time I think had just stepped down from the Bank for International Settlements, and so just in saying that, what about the Bank for International Settlements? Well, the Bank for International Settlements, weird name, was really established. I'm pretty sure it was after the Versailles Treaty, because they were saying, well, how are we going to collect all the stuff that we want from Germany, and how are we going to settle out all these reparations, etc. So they established this Bank for International Settlements, and it had a mandate, and that mandate expired, and they are with those kind of things, and they come up with new mandates and new mandates and new mandates. And right now the Basel Accords are part of the work of the Bank for International Settlements. Banks have to have so much of certain kind of capital in order to basically continue to do business. But anyway, Dr. White, what's the significance of an interview between a libertarian, organization, think tank, and a central banker who works for the central bankers' central bank, which is who the Bank for International Settlements has evolved into, okay? People might think the International Monetary Fund, but not. It's really the BIS. The BIS is, in my opinion, the real power structure out there. So I came across this. So in other words, here I am, my whole talk here is just going to be about what Dr. White was willing to say. Because if you remember what I said, the higher up the knowledge goes, the deeper the secrecy, and the BIS is as high as it goes. And so its secrecy is their shtick, okay? Secrecy is their currency, and they don't talk about anything about other stuff, like as if there was some alternative that we should talk about. So having said that, perhaps I will go into my. That's all the background to say that I cut and paste this talk together, and I'm going to use the words only of Dr. White, embellished by my own opinion of things, from the Cobden Center's website of not exactly sure of the date. Now, originally I had something up here which was actually the Cobden Center's symbol, which is a picture of William Cobden. I'm pretty sure it's William Cobden. I'm not positive about that. But that's their saying, for honest money and social progress. Imagine. The libertarians, for honest money and social progress. So irony, but anyway. So this is what they had on there. It talks about Dr. White, okay? An astounding guy, an astounding record as a banker. He was a central banker. He was a part of the Central Bank of Canada for many, many, many years, and to be at the BIS, and at the BIS had a very, 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 very powerful and very, very important and influential position as the director of. Does it say it there? Deputy Governor. Yes. Former head of yeah, he was the former. The main thing was he was a monetary and economic, policy advisor to the BIS itself. And so, I don't know, Jamie, that's maybe where you'll end up someday, But let's hope. But anyway, and it was Sean Corrigan and Max Rangeley interviewed him, and then now for those of you who think this is Devil's Tower, you're right. Okay, but this is the BIS headquarters in Basel, Switzerland. And it just, and by the way, just right here, let me just say, go to the BIS website, okay? Because there is so much information there about what is going on out there in the big world of central bankerdom, for you to be able to understand stuff that, quite frankly, the best of the press, of the financial press, get wrong almost every time they report on it. And they host the Central Bank Research Hub, which publishes the research papers from, central banks all over the world. And although most of it is banker economic talk, economic banker talk, about the trends, and all that kind of stuff, but they have some policy stuff, some important policy stuff there about the implications of what their policy decisions are based on those trends and stuff. And it's to me it's one of my favorite places to go to get bigger, newer information. But what is the Bank for International Settlements? Because remember what I said, it was put in place to implement the Versailles Treaty's workings, and yet it's evolved into this thing. So now it's still of the Bank for International Settlements, but although it was nations that set it up, it's a private bank. The Bank for International Settlements is a private bank, and it's only open to its members, and its members are private. Private. That is to say, they're there as a private part. 60 national central banks or monetary authorities. Every country doesn't have a central bank. A lot of countries that don't have central banks might surprise you, but they all have some kind of a mechanism for getting money, out into place. And 60 of mostly the biggest, all of the biggest really, and many ones that you would wonder about are there, and they're in Basel, and they do, the bulk of the work having to do with financial stability. That's actually, believe it or not, their mandate is financial stability. Now, as long as my focus has always been monetary stability and economic stability, because if you have monetary stability and economic stability, financial stability is automatic. It's just sort of like the middle step, the middle step there. And so financial stability only come about with monetary stability, but their whole thing is monetary stability. So they have the Financial Stability Board and the rules about financial stability, and that's why everybody's negotiating now about the capital adequacy requirements of who? The financially significant institutions, so that they're worried about the crash. Okay, they're worried about the crash. Believe me, they're worried about the crash. So that's the BIS building. Who put up the slide of the Devil's Tower? Was that today or yesterday? Who put that up? It was Bob. Thanks, Bob. I'm actually going out there at the end of the month. And I saw that. I was like, well, look at that. And then I realized how much it looked like the BIS building, And of course, the Lakota will tell you that Devil's Tower is the wrong name. Okay, that's just something that the white people came up with to call it the Devil's Tower. but that one over there, that was the real Devil's Tower. So this is it. This is what I cut and paste for Dr. White's speech, and that's how I'm doing it. And so let's start. Cobden interview with White begins. Cargan saying, "Oh, by the way, because this all happened in May or so, April or May, when Greece was everything going on in the world of banking and finance." So they start off. This is not his question. Is QE going to work for Europe and Greece? His question, was this long? Because that's how it works. But that was the gist of it. What about QE for Europe? Dr. White, what do you think about that? And this is now wherever I've got anything up there, that's what he said. And if I put those dots, I've only got a certain amount of room. So he said. So think. One of the reasons that I put this up to think about how they think. To think. This guy knows the European banking system is still broken. He knows that the European Central Bank has decided to do QE, and so when he tries to answer the question about what about that, he says, it's not going to really do anything good, And he says, I'm dubious that the work it was stimulating aggregate demand. Stimulating aggregate demand is what everything in the world, all the world economies need right now. Okay, demand. We need demand in the economy. So we got the resources, we don't have the demand because we don't have the money. But he says, so my general sense, I'm dubious it'll work and stimulate aggregate demand. All that said, he said, and this is about the politics of it, I think the ECB was under such pressure to act further that it had little choice but to do what it did. So in other words, what does that tell us about this system? You know, this system is supposed to be out there working to, you know, to foster, you know, prosperity in the economies that it works in. What is it doing? It's responding to pressure and doing QE, because now there's some question about this. QE is good for the bankers who are involved in it, and although he's going to say maybe not. So Corin says next again. This was not aren't ZIRP policies, zero interest rate policies. Okay, basically the central banks of the country is driving the rate down, ostensibly to promote more borrowing. Okay. Aren't ZIRP policies damaging, not only for the bank margins, but also for insurance and pension companies? Well, yeah, because we know one of the things about the banks, if you didn't get the cash from a QE, you know, asset transfer, you know, you're out there dealing with it, and when you get down to like zero interest rates, you know, it's like, how am I going to make money here? And you have also the fact that, you know, people don't want to borrow, people don't want to go further into debt because debt is the problem. So we say, well, that's actually a squeeze on the banks. He says, I'm working on a piece for the G30. The G30. I should have said something about that. Who's the G30? Is it, for instance, like the G7 or the G20? No, it's not. It's the Volcker Group of 30. That's who that is, okay? The Volcker Group of 30, who were published at Dare Turner's paper, you know, to their credit, okay? So he's working, White is working on the paper for them, the future of central banking and the future of monetary policy. Opening, maybe they were going to invite us in, I don't know, but perhaps not as well. He says, I sense from this is what I mean. I sense from talking to many of the members. These are members of the Group of 30. And if you don't know about the Group of 30, go to their website, because they're almost all present or former central bankers, okay, like Volcker, okay? So he says, from talking to those, that they are very concerned about the direction that this has taken. And in particular, continued over-reliance on stimulative monetary policy to get us out of the predicament that we're in. Now, it's really interesting to me because in reading this and further down, well, if a central bank is going to do something at a time when aggregate demand is needed in the economy, doesn't it have to stimulate? Doesn't it have to try to do something? And since there is no alternative to the system that we have, isn't that what we have to do? I mean, that's my honest question. You know, the answer is there's no other tools in their toolbox, and so that's what they do, you know. And in fact, he admits it later on. He says, but the bankers and previous central bankers, many of whom are previous central bankers, they're very concerned about the direction that this has taken. And he said, and then Corrigan says, you know, bring us to one of the other points we'd like to discuss with Bill. The bigger issue, central banks have become the go-to place in lieu of the sheer incapability of politicians, government, to address the problems in front of them. This is the irony of the dastardly work done by the bankers, is that ultimately it ends up as a government problem. Okay, government solve this problem for us. What are they going to do? Well, what's the government going to do? Borrow more money? Yeah, actually, that's the answer. So he says, so everything is now, and this is still Corrigan, and the anti-government guy, let's ask the central bank to do something. Let's ask the central bank. And he's ridiculing it as a matter of public policy. And White says, the answer is, I don't know. I think increasingly the central banks, are discomforted more than anything else. The central banks, the most powerful institutions in the world, people have talked about this, are discomforted by the situation that they find themselves in. I think it's not just the ex-central bankers, but increasingly the people that are still holding the levers, you know? The present central bankers. They are starting to ask whether they have somehow been backed into a place where they don't really want to be. So you studied all hard all your life. You went to the London Business School. You know, went to wherever. You know, you got out there. You got in central bankdom. Now you're like, you know, I'm the master of the universe here. And this thing ain't working. This thing ain't working. We don't have a toolbox that makes us going to work. And yet, there is no alternative. There's no alternative. They're starting to ask whether they've been somehow been backed into a place where they don't really want to be. But in the fullness of time, this goes back to the question. The margins are getting squeezed more and more, so that even the banks are being hurt. Imagine that. And that's sad, you know. You think about the needs of the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, you know. And this is where William White's central bankerness comes out. You know, even the banks are getting hurt. We should have a little, take up a little collection maybe for them, I don't know. But he says, if broken banks are a big chunk of the current problems, particularly in Europe, it's a bit odd that the policy is actually making the future of banks and other financial institutions still more dodgy. Well, what that means is there better be an alternative, because this one is going to hell in a handbasket quick. And the central bankers of the world realizing it. They're realizing it. They're seeing it. They're feeling it. There is a possibility, at least, that this whole exercise, what did he mean by that? To me, this whole private, debt-based money, central banking exercise could end very badly. Could end very badly, and yet there is no alternative. The only way the central banks, can fix it is by inflation, which, with the debt levels being the way they are, could very quickly get out of hand. Well, that's interesting, because this is like a central banker's perspective that I don't even understand or agree with, because how do you inflate an economy, inflate prices so that it has the appearance of the economy expanding without having more debt? When all money is debt, how can you do it? And the answer is you can't. Point is that if the debt problem is to be sorted out in any meaningful way, the government has got to get involved. Well, that's what we're saying. That's what we're doing. That's why we're doing this. To sort this thing out, to get it straightened out, to get the government involved. The hardest thing will be to admit that in many cases the debts cannot be serviced and must be written off, at least in part. I'm sorry, but that's the first time I've heard a real central banker honestly opine, that the debts are too big.
An ex-central banker.
Thank you. Thank you, Nick. An ex-central banker. He works for OECD, but at OECD, he still advises nations on their financial and economic policies. But you're right. He did retire there. The hardest thing will be to admit that in many cases the debts have to be written off, at least in part. This will be painful. I think he means the writing off will be painful. But as far as I'm concerned, it's the admitting that's going to be the most painful. We really screwed up here, and if we don't really turn this thing around and get rid of some of these debts, there's no way we can go forward. That, to me, would be the painful part, They will be painful, but the efforts of living with crippled financial institutions for many years would be worse. Well, it's not worse than the people on poverty. I can tell you that much, and that's where their policies have gotten us. Now, I agree with you, Sean, that there is an element in everybody where they're glad to be looked upon as the saviors of the day. And this goes back again to Corrigan's point about, well, we got to go to the central bank to solve this, And I guess that's part of what I left out with this question was they're seen as the saviors. But I rather sense that an increasingly large number of central banks are actually looking at what is going on and saying, we're being asked to do something that is effectively impossible. Now, it was when I read that statement right there, when I read that interview, I said, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? That the central bankers of the world are admitting that what they're being asked to do to run national economies, which is what central banks do, they run national economies, that the central bankers of the world are saying they're being asked to do something that's impossible. Well, that means that the national economies of the world can't work unless there is an alternative. And there is an alternative. As we were saying, there is an alternative. And we got it. In a nutshell, most central bankers know that our economies do not face a liquidity problem, but a solvency problem linked to excessive debt accumulation. A debt-based money system, as Dr. Yamaguchi shows, inevitably leads to too much debt, to the saturation of debt, to the point of insolvency. That is to say, there's not enough income to pay the debt. It's a solvency problem, and central banks can't fix it. Now that's me, my comment. That's it, folks. Solvency is a money system problem that central banks can't fix. Only monetary reform can. Bill, I still think, okay, well, I don't even know why I have this in here, but it makes a point that local populist politicians find mercantilism particularly hard to resist. And mercantilism to me means a free enterprise. You know, that's what I mean by that. You know, they would say free markets or capital markets or whatever, but to me that's what it means. And he said, if they're appealing to the disenfranchised urban working man, which politicians do, they go out there and they appeal to disenfranchised. It's very hard to make an argument for free trade at the same time, unfortunately. Well, Bill Clinton never thought that, you know, and he never saw a free trade agreement that he didn't love. But the point and this is what I mean about that. The populist politicians, you know, the people that want to be running on the fact that you know, we need to do so. We the people need to be doing something about it. Bernie Sanders is one of those, okay. But at least Bernie Sanders makes no argument for free trade, and he never has. And as you know, my hat's off to Bernie Sanders on that point. White says for sure it should also be noted that many fringe political parties in Europe are also talking about leaving the Eurozone. Well, a little nationalism there going, you know, it gets going with the populism. There's a very strong protectionist kind of element that seems to be part of what they're talking about. It's a quick fix, and you might even say they might even be throwing tariffs in there as a means of protecting the national economy. One of the things I'm increasingly worried about is a look at the mistakes that the politicians are making. Bill, hold the mirror up. You know, you want to start looking at mistakes, you know, look at the mistakes the BIS has made and the IMF has made and the central bankers all over the world have made. And we're looking about the mistakes the politicians have made. Politicians gave you the money power. And what are you doing with it for us? Thank you very much. And that they are going to satisfy the guy in the street who wants a quick fix. Ultimately, it's a political thing. I'm currently back to reflecting on a very old issue, namely, whether we need a new international monetary system with rules to impose some discipline. Otherwise, we're going to wind up doing some really dumb stuff. That's really something to think about right there. You know, that's really something to think about right there. First of all, to me, it opens up a new international monetary system, a new set of national monetary systems that go, you know, cross nationals. That's where I'm at. Whereas these guys are thinking, no, a super Uber bank, you know, and we'll give everybody all the money that they need to accomplish their prosperity, you know, however we think about it. And this is what I mean about the central banker mentality, because I'm actually an admirer of William White. This is candor, but also he was actually a guy. If you read some of the stuff that he's worked on, you know, he's a guy with a good heart, okay. But his knowledge and his understandings and his wisdom, and with regard to central bankdom, that's where we can't figure out how we screwed this one up. So I think what we need is a new one, you know, and then we can put some rules in place. So what happened about free markets? You know, This is the free market. This is the free market monetary system era that we've got right here. Otherwise, going to end up doing some really stuff. Otherwise, Corrigan, we're trying to. Okay, this is a little bit about. We try to smooth the cycle out, and we perpetuate the debt. Okay, we've enhanced the effects of lower interest rates and more extended payment terms. It means that monthly takes so low, we can build a bigger debt mountain. Frankly, I thought I threw this slide out. And with that comes all the instability and all the problems of micromanaging the cycle. Now that's the libertarian perspective right there, you know, because he's saying, well, we're reducing interest rates, and by doing that, we're letting people take on more debt, because all we think about is how much we can afford to make a payment for. So we have more and more and more and more debt because the more the interest rates go down. And that exacerbates the debt problem, and the debt problem is the problem. White says, absolutely. It's notable that in the course of the last couple of years, the BIS in its annual report has repeatedly used the phrase of the debt trap. Okay? But it's really interesting to me that he mentions that there because this is their policy. You know, this is the policy of the central banks that are members of the BIS. All of them. All of them. Not like there's somebody in there. Another flow upward, you know, to the people that are issuing the debt, et cetera, et cetera. And that is actually going to cause the crash. Now, they're afraid that the crash that they have designed and that they've built is going to actually manifest. And if it does, what happens? This is something going on here with this dynamic process that is being increasingly recognized as dangerous. Central banker, central banker. There's something about this thing that's going on right now that's dangerous. But there is no alternative. It's sort of like, you know, we got to hunker down and take the beating that they're going to give us, you know. In the fullness of time, however, margins are getting squeezed more so that even the banks are hurt. If broken banks are a big chunk of current problems in Europe, it's a bit odd that your policy would make the future banks and other financial institutions still more dodgy. Monetary reform. Well, it was really about money creation, but monetary reform, you know, is still out there, as, you know, as an issue. So what's your thoughts on, for instance, the Chicago Plan, or Martin Wolf's article in the Financial Times last year discussing endogenously created money? That was a bad way to put that, because his article was discussing the fallacies of endogenously creating money in favor of exogenously created. That is to say, a mechanical rule for creating money according to the needs of the economy. Do you have a perspective on any of this? William White. I find it extraordinary that some economists still do not recognize that we have a fiat money system. I do too, Banks do not lend money that has been saved. Who was it that raised that question? Yeah, who was that? Was somebody in here? They don't lend the money. They create money by making loans and simply writing up both sides of their balance sheet. Well, we've known that all along. I mean, that was the thing when my dad got to me and said, Joey, they don't have the money that they lend anyway. They just create it and they hope that the payment system works out. This system clearly greases the wheels of commerce, but it can also get badly out of control, as we've seen in recent years. It can also get badly out of control. Aren't we there? Are we not there yet? This is really an issue here. Do we want to go back to 100% reserve banking? The central bankers, monetary and economic policy guy asking the question. Now you see, this didn't happen before. This is what I think my dad meant when he said, revolution is 90% opportunity. Okay, that's my take on it. Okay, that's what gets me excited about doing it. Okay. Do we want to go back to 100% reserve banking? Something of that nature, as suggested by the Chicago School and Irving Fisher in the 20s. While I have not thought enough about it to say where I'd come out on this debate, that seems odd. What else are you thinking about, Are there a lot of other things to think about? It certainly is an issue that we should be thinking about, but I'm not, okay? It's an issue we should be thinking, but I'm not thinking about it. This is still him. This is also suggested by Martin Wolf and John Kay of the Financial Times. These are serious people whose suggestions should be treated equally seriously. And that's like telling to me, When this guy is saying, these guys know their stuff, and this is what they're saying, and we should be taking them seriously. That's what, the jig is up, okay? Maybe there isn't, maybe they want to think there is no alternative, but we know there is. We also need to go back and look at the whole international monetary system, or non-system, as others have called it. Okay, so this is where this is actually where the interview ends, although I left out a lot of stuff, and I got to tell you that I've taken incredible license here with this interview to cut and chop and paste it to try to make it something that I could talk about. And I have to thank the Cobden Center, and Dr. William White for their incredible candor. I was very surprised to see it, quite frankly, on the Cobden Center. It's like, to me, it was kind of almost like one of those things that, uh-oh, what have we got ourselves into here, you know? Because that was my take on it. So this is me now. So is there an obvious takeaway here? Does any of this matter to we, the bid actors in the evolving theater of money system reform? You know, we know that's what's going on out there. Perhaps not, but perhaps. If reform to national money systems were to ultimately save the day for the world central bankers, and I'm in favor of doing that. I still back to my dad's thing about, you know, that we're going to have central bankers. We're going to have bankers, we're going to have central bankers. Then perhaps all the world's money systems would begin to fulfill Saudi's role of money. Most important, you know, book, in my opinion, written on this subject. That of distributing the national wealth. In other words, reforming the money system leads to distributing the national wealth equitably, fairly. Rather than concentrating it through debt-based money, the opposite. To our wealth creators, the people who get up every day, they punch the time clock, they ring the school bell, they show up at the job site or their la tienda for business, those who make the goods and provide the services that everyone needs in order to restore the road chosen by the last American monetary revolutionists, that of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, which is where we're headed, in my opinion, with the work that we're trying to do. My thinking on resolving the whether or not of that perhaps outcome is that we are at the point when we would be well served in calling for a new national monetary commission. And I just want to square that with Dr. William White's thinking. Dr. William White's thinking was more of, I don't know what we're going to do, but we got to do something, and calling for a national monetary commission. A national monetary commission, you know, if it took off in the right direction this day, to me would be like an earth-shattering event for them. The money system, by the central banker's own evidence here, is obviously broken and insolvent. Obviously it's broken and insolvent. They're saying it's broken and insolvent. That's what they're saying. So to move the banner of reform through the public policy debate that lies ahead, perhaps we can gain by promoting the idea of MMT fave, Dr. Hyman Minsky. You know, that's when the MMT, they're always like, Dr. Hyman Minsky, Dr. Hyman Minsky. Dr. Hyman Minsky was a great economist, a noted progressive economist even today, in his noted 1994 conversion to Fisher's 100% money reform, working paper number 127 at the Levy Institute. Anybody wants to get that and read it. But this is the conclusion of his paper. He says, the time has come to open a national inquiry into the structure of the banking and financial system, the sluggish economy of the past decades, again, okay, combined with the apparent reluctance of the Federal Reserve to give full employment a chance, can mean that our financing structures are not consistent with the needs of a progressive democracy. That's what it can mean. That's what it does mean. And that's why we need to change it. In the past, serious changes were the result of serious inquiries. I suggest that enough is amiss in our financial and banking structures that it's time to go back to the drawing board and determining what the monetary, financial, and financing arrangement should be in the 21st century. He said, a late 20th century National Monetary Commission should be in the public policy agenda. Obviously, this was 1994 he wrote that. Well, it's too late for that one, but a 21st century National Monetary Commission is, in my humble opinion, indeed in order. Thank you.
Thank you.